This is Land of Havilah, Proverbs 30. This chapter is a section unto itself with its own heading coming up. Verse 1. The words of Agur, the son of Yakeh, the revelation, the man says to Ithiel and Ukal. Comment in verse 1, this section is by Agur, the son of Yakeh. Agur says this is a revelation and that he's delivering it to Ithiel and Ukal. The names are a mystery. Possibly Solomon's the author and he was using the names as a literary tool. Or maybe, but this seems less likely, there was an actual person named Agur who wrote this to an actual Ithiel and Ukal. We could mention the Hebrew meaning of those names, but it wouldn't be very helpful. So let's chalk up the names as a mystery. Agur says, verse 2, Surely I am the most ignorant man, and don't have a man's understanding. I have not learned wisdom, neither do I have the knowledge of the Holy One. Who has ascended up into heaven and descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has bound the waters in his garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if you know? Comment in verses 2 to 4 we just read, it would be inappropriate for Solomon to write this under his own name because he was a king and he's professing inadequacy and ignorance. A king wouldn't be free to admit his shortcomings. He'd have an obligation to keep up his image. But assuming this is by Solomon and assuming he's revealing his own thoughts about himself, he's admitting there's a lot he doesn't know. He knows he's wise by comparison to other men because God granted him wisdom and told him he was wise. But at the same time, in verses 2 to 4, he's also aware how little he knows. Quote, Surely I am the most ignorant man, neither do I have knowledge of the Holy One. End quote. Someone said that in our lifetime, in our own modern times, after all the scientific advancements and so forth, that we as a culture know less than 1% of all there is to know. We know very little in the grand scheme of things, and when you put God in the mix, we feel even more ignorant. We know what God has revealed of himself, but at the same time, we know he's infinite, which means there's very much of him we don't know. The character Agur, or Solomon as it may be, continues in verses 2 and 3 that he hasn't learned wisdom, at least not much considering the vast scope of things, and has no knowledge of the Holy One, at least not much considering the vast scope of God. And interestingly, as a foreshadowing of things to come in the prophetic future after Solomon, he asks, What is God and his son's name, if you know? End quote. Ever since Jesus came, we know his son's name. Agur goes on now to some things he knows. Verse 5. Every word of God is flawless. He's a shield to those who take refuge in him. Don't you add to his words, lest he reprove you, and you be found a liar. Comment in verse 5, every word of God is flawless, end quote. We can depend on what God says. Then, quote, he's a shield to those who take refuge in him, end quote. In verse 6, Bible teachers and false prophets should pay attention. Quote, don't add to his words, lest he reprove you and you be found a liar, end quote. In a way, teaching the Bible is a fallacy to start with because what can we add to the Word of God? God help us that we handle his Word correctly. Agur goes on, verse 7. 2 things I have asked of you. Don't deny me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full, deny you, and say, Who is Yahweh? Or lest I be poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. Comment in verses 7 to 9, Agur asks 2 things. He's asking them from God, we assume. Number 1, that God wouldn't allow him to be deceived or misled about anything. Quote, remove far from me falsehood and lies, end quote. He knows he'll never know the vast scope of everything, but he wants what he thinks he knows to be accurate. No deceptions, please, God. And the second thing, neither poverty nor riches, because in either situation he might deny God. Now on to some random thoughts. Verse 10. Don't slander a servant to his master, lest he curse you, and you be held guilty. Comment, Jesus was the ultimate server of his master, which was God the Father, Isaiah 53:11. Our salvation will be based on whether we slander God's servant Jesus, on the one hand, or give Jesus his due on the other. God will curse us if we slander his servant Jesus, and bless us if we give Jesus his due. Now, still in random mode, speaking of a generation characterized by wickedness, verse 11. There is a generation that curses their father and doesn't bless their mother. There is a generation that's pure in their own eyes, yet are not washed from their filthiness. There is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes. Their eyelids are lifted up. There is a generation whose teeth are like swords and their jaws like knives, to devour the poor from the earth and the needy from among men. Comment: the most striking thing about a wicked society is in verse 12 that they think they're pure. They disrespect their parents in verse 11, are proud and haughty in verse 13, and devour the poor in verse 14. Now on the subject of satisfaction, verse 15. The leech has 2 daughters, give, give. There are 3 things that are never satisfied, 4 that don't say enough: Sheol, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire that doesn't say enough. Comment: the leech in verse 15 we assume is a dependent person, a human leech. He's never satisfied. He has 2 daughters, give and give. He expects to be supported. Somehow it's wired into his thinking that someone else should support him. In verse 16, on another subject, if a woman's unable to have children, the desire to have children can reach extreme proportions. She aches to have children like the dry earth aches for water. She's no more satisfied without children than Sheol is, or a burning fire is satisfied. Now a one-verse proverb, verse 17. The eye that mocks at his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, the young eagles shall eat it. Comment: a son who mocks and scornfully disobeys his parents probably won't literally have his eyes plucked out by birds, but it'll be something just as horrible. He'll have a terrible life and come to a terrible end somehow. And for anyone who cares to accept it, in the Bible, any bird that picks at flesh is symbolic of evil. Genesis 15:11, Leviticus 11:13-19, and Revelation 18:2. The son who mocks and scorns his parents will be consumed by evil is the point of the proverb. Now something that catches Agur's imagination, or Solomon's imagination, verse 18. There are 3 things which are too amazing for me, 4 which I don't understand: the way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the middle of the sea, and the way of a man with a maiden. Comment: in verses 18 and 19, there's something mysterious and wonderful about these things, including about the way between a man and a woman. The way being chemistry is how we might express it. The chemistry between a man and woman is a wonder. There's no commandment in this proverb or anything we didn't already know. We all know that men and women have chemistry. This is just God letting us know that he knows. Now a one-liner, verse 20. So is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong. Comment: an adulterous woman has no sense of guilt. She does the act and rationalizes it. For some reason that makes perfect sense only to her, there was nothing wrong with it. The commandment doesn't apply to her in her mind. Verse 21. For 3 things the earth trembles, and under 4 it can't bear up: for a servant when he is king, a fool when he is filled with food, for an unloved woman when she's married, and a servant who's heir to her mistress. Comment: in verses 21-23, some promotions are hard to handle gracefully: a servant promoted to king, a fool who's filled, an unloved woman who finally marries, and a maidservant when the master takes her on as another wife to be a rival to the wife she previously served. Certain situations are set up for problems. We need extra grace if we get a big promotion, a big windfall, or if our station in life completely changes. Verse 24. There are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. The ants are not a strong people, yet they provide their food in the summer. The conies are but a feeble folk, yet they make their houses in the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet they advance in ranks. You can catch a lizard with your hands, yet it's in kings' palaces. Comment in verses 24 to 28, a coney is a small furry animal that lives in rock piles. Ants, conies, locusts, and lizards are wonders of God, each for their own reason. For example, how is it that an ant has enough wisdom in his little head to gather food and store it for the winter? Now, switching again, verse 29. There are 3 things which are stately in their march, 4 which are stately in going. The lion, which is mightiest among animals and doesn't turn away for any, the greyhound, the male goat also, and the king against whom there is no rising up. Comment in verses 29 to 31, 4 things are notable for being stately. They have remarkable confidence. The lion, then something difficult to translate, here translated greyhound, then a male goat, then a king who has a firm grasp on power, against whom there is no rising up. There's something remarkable about that cocky and confident attitude. It's another testament to the wonders of the universe created by God. Now, rounding out the chapter, verse 32, if you've done foolishly in lifting up yourself, or if you've thought evil, put your hand over your mouth, for as the churning of milk produces butter, and the wringing of the nose produces blood, so the forcing of wrath produces strife. Comment in verse 33, what does it mean that the forcing of wrath produces strife? If you exalt yourself or have evil on your mind in verse 32, you're agitating God. If you agitate milk, you make butter. If you agitate God, you make wrath. Don't agitate God. Pride and the thought of evil agitate God. The 31st and final chapter of Proverbs is next.